The stars stretched out infinitely as the massive ships of the Vorin Empire and the Draxel Confederation collided in space. A battlefield that stretched across light years, the blackness of space, lit up by the fiery explosions of dying ships. The Vorin Empire, a highly advanced civilization with technology that seemed nearly invincible, had the Draxel fleet cornered. For the Draxel Confederation, it was a battle of survival. They were vastly outmatched in both numbers and firepower, but they weren't giving up yet. General Raxar, leader of the Draxel forces, stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the chaotic scene unfolding before him. His eyes narrowed as the Vorin warships unleashed a brutal assault, cutting through the Draxel defenses like a hot knife through butter. Every attempt to fight back was met with overwhelming firepower. Raxar clenched his fists, the weight of command bearing down on him. His people, his fleet, were being wiped out. There was no way they could win this fight unless something changed. And then, in the midst of the chaos, an idea flashed into his mind. A desperate hope. He knew there was one force in the galaxy that could turn the tide of this battle: humans. It was an old, almost forgotten story among the Draxel, the legend of humanity's unyielding determination and fierce fighting spirit. The Vorin Empire had underestimated them, and even now, humanity was often dismissed as little more than a nuisance. But General Raxar had seen enough. He had witnessed humans fight against overwhelming odds, survive battles that others would have run from, and win when no one thought they could. Raxar wasted no time. He ordered his communications officer to open a direct line to Captain Ilara, the commander of the human fleet. The message was simple: "We need your help now. If you don't, the Vorin will destroy us, and Earth will be next." He paused, his heart pounding. The thought of dragging humanity into this war troubled him. The Vorin Empire would retaliate without mercy, and Earth, with its relatively primitive technology compared to the Vorin, would be an easy target. But if he didn't do this, if he didn't ask for help, the Draxel Confederation would fall, and then the Vorin would turn their attention to Earth anyway. There was no escape. Raxar watched as the human ships slowly came into view on the long-range scanners. For a moment, he allowed himself a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, humanity could make a difference. But as soon as the message was sent, a deafening roar shook the battlefield. A Vorin orbital bombardment struck the Draxel flagship, Raxar's own ship, obliterating its outer defenses and tearing through the hull like paper. The shockwave rattled the very foundations of the vessel. The lights flickered, and the bridge trembled under the force of the impact. Raxar stumbled as the tremor passed, his mind racing. The message had been sent. There was no turning back now. But as he looked at the destruction around him, a cold sense of dread washed over him. His fleet, what was left of it, was falling apart. The Vorin were relentless. His people were dying, and soon there would be nothing left. He forced himself to focus, turning his attention back to the tactical display. The remaining Draxel ships were in full retreat, but they were being picked off one by one. There was no escape. Only one hope remained: the humans. And yet the very presence of humanity in this war would draw the full wrath of the Vorin Empire. It was a gamble, and he wasn't sure whether it would save them or destroy them all. As Raxar's thoughts churned with fear and uncertainty, another orbital bombardment struck. This time, it was the Draxel capital. Raxar's heart sank as he watched the great cities of his people burn from space. The Vorin had breached the planet's defenses, and now the heart of the Draxel Confederation was under attack. It was a devastating blow, and he knew that if the Vorin captured the capital, it would be over. For the first time, the Draxel Empire was on the brink of total annihilation. He gritted his teeth and turned to his communication officer. "Is the human fleet responding?" he asked urgently. The officer hesitated, eyes flickering nervously as he scanned the data. "Yes, sir," he replied. "The humans have received your message. They are on their way." But the officer paused, unsure of how to continue. Raxar's eyes narrowed. "What is it?" "They're not alone," the officer said, eyes widening. "There's a massive fleet following them. It's the Vorin." Raxar's heart skipped a beat. The Vorin had detected the human fleet's arrival and were closing in on their position faster than expected. But there was no time to dwell on it. He turned to face the screen, watching as the dark void of space was filled with the menacing shapes of Vorin warships. His mind raced. He had just sent out a plea for help, and now it seemed that humanity's involvement was already putting everything in jeopardy. Was this a mistake? On the human ship, Captain Ilara sat in the command chair, her fingers tracing the screen as she reviewed the data from General Raxar's message. Her face was set, eyes sharp, and her thoughts focused on one thing: her people. Humanity had a history of fighting for survival, of doing whatever it took to protect the innocent. She had no intention of allowing the Vorin Empire to continue their rampage. She sat forward, pressing the button to speak. "All hands, prepare for battle," she ordered. "Target the Vorin fleet's weak points. We are going to fight back." The crew of the human fleet moved with military precision as they engaged the Vorin Empire forces. But Captain Ilara couldn't shake the weight of Raxar's words. If humanity enters this war, the Vorin will target Earth directly. The thought lingered in her mind as the human fleet's advanced cloaking devices activated. Their ships blended into the backdrop of space, unseen by the Vorin forces. For now, humanity was hidden. But for how long? Suddenly, a red alert flashed on the screen. The Vorin fleet had detected them. The Vorin Empire unleashed its devastating attack, firing energy beams that ripped through the human ship's shields. The battle had begun, but now Ilara was faced with an even greater problem. As the human fleet entered the fray, Captain Ilara's mind raced. She had never faced an enemy as powerful as the Vorin, and yet here she was, risking everything for an alliance she barely understood. Then, as her ship dodged incoming fire, she saw something that sent a chill down her spine. The Vorin superweapon, the one Raxar had warned her about, was on the move. The stakes were no longer just about saving a fleet. Now, it was about saving an entire planet. The very planet humanity had called home. And yet, Ilara knew there was no turning back now. She had already made her choice. She opened a channel to Raxar. "General," she said, her voice steady, "we're here. Let's end this." But even as she spoke those words, she knew that the real battle was only just beginning. And in this fight, Earth, humanity's home, might very well become the final prize in this deadly war. The black void of space was calm, too calm. For a moment, it seemed as though the battle had come to an unexpected halt. But then, without warning, the Vorin Empire's ships, massive and menacing, began to shake as though an invisible hand had struck them. The Draxel fleet, already battered and bruised, couldn't believe their eyes as the human fleet appeared from the shadows, their ships cloaked in the most advanced technology the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Ilara had done what was thought impossible. She had brought her fleet, cloaked and undetected, right into the heart of the Vorin Empire's grip. The Vorin were powerful, yes, but they had never encountered anything like this. Their advanced sensors, designed to detect even the slightest movement in space, failed to recognize the humans' presence until it was too late. The battle that ensued was chaotic, fierce, and fast. Ilara stood on the bridge of her flagship, a towering figure among her officers, as she surveyed the unfolding carnage. Her fingers danced across the controls, issuing orders with a calmness that belied the storm raging outside. The Vorin Empire had no idea what hit them. Suddenly, the human fleet sprang into action, their ships unleashing a barrage of eye-guided drones that streaked through space like deadly comets. Each drone struck the Vorin warships with pinpoint precision, bypassing their advanced shields and causing massive explosions. The Vorin, taken completely by surprise, faltered for just a moment. That moment was all Ilara needed. The humans, known for their unpredictable combat style, unleashed every trick they had learned over decades of survival. Despite the overwhelming odds, they moved with shocking precision, striking the Vorin Empire's rear flank, the weakest part of their formation. The Draxil fleet, still reeling from their near-total destruction, watched in stunned silence as humanity took the fight directly to their enemies. Bonner, a young human soldier, was in the thick of it all. His ship, a sleek vessel designed for speed and firepower, darted through space, firing on all cylinders. He had never experienced a battle like this before, and the adrenaline coursing through his veins was almost too much to bear. Every command he gave was met with quick obedience from his crew, and every shot they fired seemed to strike true. Yet, in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the fear that had been haunting him since the moment he stepped onto the battlefield. What if they failed? Bonner's eyes narrowed as he locked onto a Vorin warship, its massive frame bristling with weaponry. His fingers tightened on the controls, guiding his ship in a sharp arc toward the enemy. "All guns, fire," he barked, and the laser cannons on his ship erupted in a blinding flash. The Vorin warship's shields flickered, then collapsed, allowing the shots to tear through its hull. Bonner barely had time to celebrate before an explosion ripped through the side of his ship. The ship rocked violently, and Bonner's world spun into chaos. Red lights flashed, and alarms blared as the hull was breached. His hands flew over the controls, trying to regain some semblance of control over the ship. But it was no use. The damage was too severe. The ship listed to one side, and Bonner was thrown forward, crashing into the console in front of him. Pain exploded through his chest as his vision blurred. He barely had time to take a breath before another hit shook the ship, sending him tumbling across the bridge. As the ship veered out of control, Bonner's mind raced. Would he survive? Would anyone? The Vorin Empire was relentless, and even with the humans' sudden advantage, victory wasn't guaranteed. The thought of death lingered in the back of his mind, but it was something he refused to accept. He fought through the pain, pulling himself up from the floor, his hands slick with blood as he gripped the console again. His ship's AI, still functioning despite the damage, spoke to him in a calm, synthetic voice. "Warning. Hull integrity at 40%. Immediate evasive maneuvers required." Bonner barely registered the words, his mind focused entirely on surviving. His crew members, though equally shaken, continued to fight, coordinating with the rest of the fleet as they took on the Vorin Empire's forces. Every blast, every explosion, was a reminder that they were in the fight of their lives. The action on the battlefield was brutal, and the battle raged on. The human fleet had taken the Vorin by surprise, but now they were engaged in an all-out war for survival. It was no longer about making an impression, it was about winning. Bonner's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice over the intercom. "Bonner, we've got your back. Stay with us." It was his commanding officer, Sergeant Alyssa, one of the best pilots humanity had. The relief that flooded his chest was short-lived, however, as another blast hit his ship. He gritted his teeth and pressed on. There was no time for fear. His eye-guided drones were still active, and the Vorin warships were taking heavy fire. Bonner's heart pounded as he fought to keep his ship intact, knowing that every second counted. If he couldn't hold it together, he might not be the only one who fell. As the battle raged, the focus shifted between Captain Ilara, commanding the fleet from her flagship, and Bonner, a young soldier struggling to stay alive. But their stories were the same. Hope and survival were now intertwined, and the outcome of this battle could change the course of history. With every drone fired and every shield shattered, the Vorin Empire realized that the humans weren't just a nuisance. They were a force to be reckoned with. The humans had made their move, and there was no turning back now. They had struck first, and now they would have to face the full wrath of the Vorin Empire. But as long as humanity's will to survive burned bright, there was still hope. And for Bonner, and so many others, that was all they needed. The tide of the battle had shifted. The Vorin Empire, once so confident in their overwhelming power, now found themselves reeling. They had long seen humanity as weak and primitive, an afterthought in the grand scale of galactic conflict. But now, the humans were fighting back with a ferocity and resourcefulness the Vorin had never anticipated. The tide was turning, and Captain Ilara had her hands on the wheel, guiding humanity's desperate counterattack. From the bridge of her flagship, Ilara watched the chaos unfold. Her fleet was outnumbered, and their ships weren't as advanced as the Vorins, but what they lacked in raw power, they more than made up for in ingenuity. The human fleet had always been known for their resourcefulness, and now was the time to prove it. Captain Ilara leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she activated her fleet's advanced AI systems. The human-designed AI was a marvel, able to make real-time calculations faster than any human mind. It allowed her to spot weaknesses in the Vorin's defense and exploit them with precision. The Vorin were scrambling to adapt, their once confident movements now turning into a flurry of confusion. Their ships, massive and heavily armed, were now caught off guard as humanity's AI-guided drones tore through their ranks. The Vorin tried to regroup, but the humans were everywhere. They struck fast, targeting weak points with deadly accuracy. The human strategy was unconventional, but it worked. The real shock came when the humans deployed a new stealth technology, something the Vorin hadn't seen before. Their ships could now phase in and out of visibility, slipping in and out of existence like ghosts. One moment, a human ship would be in plain view, and the next, it would vanish, only to reappear on the other side of the Vorin warships, launching surprise attacks. It was disorienting for the Vorin, who had always relied on their superior technology to dominate their enemies. Now, they were left blind, unable to anticipate the human fleet's next move. But the humans were not just relying on their stealth technology. On the ground, the robotic soldiers were unleashed. They stormed Vorin positions with incredible speed and power, creating chaos on the battlefield. The robots, designed for close-quarters combat, tore through the Vorin's defenses, forcing them to fall back. The Vorin had never faced anything like this. Intelligent machines built with one purpose: destruction. The battlefield had turned into a nightmare for the Vorin, who had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. Still, the humans were not without their struggles. They may have gained the element of surprise, but they were still outnumbered, and the Vorin were not going down without a fight. As the humans pushed forward, the Vorin Empire retaliated with their most devastating weaponry. Orbital bombardments rained down on the battlefield, and massive waves of enemy ships descended, hoping to crush the human fleet under sheer force. Captain Ilara watched as her fleet fought valiantly, but the bombardments were relentless. She knew they couldn't keep this up for long. The humans had always been the underdogs in the galaxy, and today was no different. The Vorin might have superior numbers and firepower, but the humans had something the Vorin didn't: sheer willpower. Ilara's voice rang out across the bridge as she issued commands to her crew. "We won't back down. Not now. Not ever. We fight for Earth. We fight for humanity." The crew responded with a roar of agreement, and the humans dug in their heels. Despite the overwhelming odds, they refused to give up. They adapted, they fought with everything they had, and slowly, bit by bit, they began to push the Vorin back. But just as it seemed the tide was turning in their favor, a new threat emerged. The Vorin, desperate to break the humans' momentum, unleashed their most devastating weapon yet, a superweapon capable of annihilating entire planets. Vorin warships surrounding the superweapon launched a direct assault on Earth itself, locking onto the planet with an advanced targeting system. The Vorin had placed the fate of Earth in their sights. The humans, for all their cunning and courage, were now faced with an impossible choice: continue fighting the Vorin Empire, or divert all their resources to protect Earth. The decision was immediate. Captain Ilara barked orders, rallying her crew for one final push. "Defend Earth, no matter the cost. Everything we fought for comes down to this." As the human fleet sped toward Earth, The camera zoomed in on Ilara's flagship, now in the heart of the battle. Her ship was damaged, its hull cracked and scarred from the relentless fighting. But it didn't matter. They would not stop. They couldn't. Humanity's survival depended on their ability to hold the line. Bonner, still fighting with everything he had, was now facing the unimaginable. His thoughts raced as he looked back at Earth, the planet that meant everything to him. The Vorin superweapon loomed large in the distance, and the pressure was mounting. With every shot, with every maneuver, the humans were racing against time. They were the underdogs in this fight, but they had something the Vorin Empire couldn't understand: the will to survive. As the final moments approached, the suspense reached its peak. The human fleet was engaged in a brutal fight for Earth's survival, but the Vorin Empire was relentless. The battle wasn't over, and the humans had no idea if they would make it out alive. One thing was certain: this battle would determine the fate of not just humanity, but the galaxy itself. The stakes had never been higher, and as the battle continued, the humans knew they were about to face their greatest challenge yet. Would they survive the Vorin's wrath? Or would the superweapon prove to be humanity's undoing? The answer would come soon enough, but only if the humans could hold their ground long enough to reach Earth's defense. The tension in the air was palpable as Captain Ilara stared at the blinking holographic map of the battlefield. The Vorin Empire had always been a force to be reckoned with, their massive ships and advanced technology a nearly insurmountable obstacle. But the tide of the war had shifted, and now humanity had a chance to make their stand. The stakes were higher than ever, and it was clear that Earth's survival depended on the humans' ability to strike a decisive blow. Just as hope seemed to flicker on the horizon, an unexpected figure stepped forward. General Raxar, the commander of the Draxel Confederation, appeared on the communication screen. His appearance was a surprise to Ilara and her crew, especially considering his previous reluctance to ally with humanity. He had always been hesitant to involve the humans in the war, fearing that their presence might only escalate the conflict. But now he had come to a bitter realization: without humanity's help, the galaxy was doomed. "I never thought I would be asking for your help, Captain Ilara," Raxar began, his voice heavy with regret. "But the Vorin have something that could end this war, and it's already in motion. I helped them design it, a superweapon capable of wiping out entire planets." Ilara's brow furrowed in disbelief. The Vorin had always been known for their overwhelming power, but the idea of a weapon that could obliterate entire worlds was a terrifying thought. "What kind of weapon are we talking about, General?" she asked, her voice sharp. Raxar hesitated for a moment before continuing. "It's a weapon that can focus the energy of a star and unleash it on a planetary scale. They've already targeted Earth. We have no time to waste." The gravity of the situation settled in. The Vorin superweapon was not just a threat to the galaxy. It was a direct threat to Earth, the home of humanity. Raxar's offer of intelligence on the weapon was their best chance of stopping it, but it would come at a price. In exchange for this information, Raxar demanded humanity's full commitment to the fight. Ilara knew that there was no time to debate the ethics of alliances. Earth's survival was on the line, and she had no choice but to accept. Meanwhile, down on the battlefield, Bonner, a young human soldier, was preparing for a dangerous mission. He had survived the initial wave of attacks and was now leading a team on the ground to infiltrate the Vorin base where the superweapon was housed. His heart raced as he looked at the faces of his comrades. They were all in this together, and they all knew the risks. Bonner had always been the type to charge headfirst into battle, but this mission was different. The stakes were personal now. As the team prepared to drop onto the surface of a distant moon, Bonner thought about his fallen comrades. The faces of those he had lost haunted him, and he knew that if they didn't succeed in deactivating the weapon, their deaths would have been in vain. The ground assault began as soon as they landed. The team was quick to engage, moving through the dense jungle of the moon's surface. The air was thick with tension, every footstep echoing in the silence of the unknown. Bonner's mind raced as he tried to focus on the task at hand. They were racing against time. If they didn't reach the weapon before the Vorin activated it, Earth would be destroyed. As they infiltrated the Vorin base, the atmosphere grew colder, the air tinged with the smell of burning metal. Bonner's team encountered heavy resistance from Vorin soldiers, and the battle quickly escalated into a brutal firefight. Blaster fire echoed through the halls, and explosions rocked the base. Bonner's heart pounded in his chest as he fought alongside his comrades, the adrenaline pushing him to his limits. With each step, he felt the weight of his mission pressing down on him. If they failed, Earth would be lost forever. Meanwhile, General Raxar was leading a crucial ground assault on a Vorin command center located on a barren moon. The Draxel Confederation had managed to infiltrate the Vorin's planetary defenses, and now they were on the ground, fighting tooth and nail to gain control of the heart of the Vorin war machine. The battle was fierce, and Raxar's soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing that the fate of the galaxy rested in their hands. The Vorin had fortified the command center with layers of defense, but the humans and Draxel had one thing the Vorin couldn't predict: the will to fight. The ground combat was intense, with soldiers moving through the narrow corridors of the command center, encountering fierce resistance at every turn. The Vorin soldiers, once thought to be unstoppable, were beginning to crack under the pressure of the assault. But it wasn't just about the soldiers. It was about what they were fighting for. They weren't just battling for survival. They were fighting for a future where they could live in peace, free from the tyranny of the Vorin Empire. Back in space, Captain Ilara was preparing for the most critical part of the operation. Her flagship, the Sovereign, was on a direct course toward the Vorin flagship, and she knew that the fate of the galaxy would be decided in the coming minutes. The Vorin leader, a ruthless figure known as Emperor Philos, was aboard that ship. If they could destroy him, the Vorin Empire would crumble. But if they were wrong, it could spark a galactic war that would annihilate everything they had fought for. Ilara's heart pounded as the distance between her ship and the Vorin flagship closed. Her mind raced with the decision she had to make. Destroy Emperor Philos, and humanity would send a clear message that they would never be subjugated again. But would it be enough? The political ramifications of such a move were uncertain. Save Philos, and they could open the door to peace, but at what cost? The weight of the decision felt unbearable. She glanced at her crew, who were just as tense as she was, all waiting for her command. Ilara knew that whatever choice she made would define the future of the galaxy. If they succeeded in their mission, the war would end, and a new era could begin. But if they failed, it would plunge the galaxy into even greater conflict, one that might last for centuries. As the Vorin flagship came into firing range, Ilara made her decision. With a deep breath, she issued the command to hold fire. Her heart ached as she weighed the consequences of sparing the life of Emperor Philos. The battle raged on around them, but Ilara had chosen a different path. She would negotiate. If Philos was willing to listen, there might still be a chance for peace. The lives of millions depended on it. However, as the Vorin flagship loomed ever closer, Ilara's comms officer suddenly shouted, "Captain, we've lost contact with General Raxar. His forces have been overwhelmed. The Vorin are regrouping." The warning came too late. Emperor Philos, realizing that his empire was losing control, had activated his fleet's last-ditch counterattack. With a chilling voice, the Emperor issued a final order to his fleet: destroy the human forces, no matter the cost. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as the Vorin flagship opened fire. Laser beams and missiles rained down on her fleet, ripping through the void of space. The humans were caught off guard, but they quickly adapted, using their advanced cloaking technology and evasive maneuvers to stay one step ahead. The battle was far from over, but now, the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. As Ilara's flagship dodged fire and retaliated, the battle began to turn into a chaotic frenzy. The Vorin fleet launched wave after wave of counterattacks, but humanity was relentless. The AI-guided drones tore through the Vorens' defenses, while robotic soldiers stormed their positions, overwhelming their enemies with sheer force. General Raxar's forces, though battered, had managed to push through and seize control of the Voren command center, cutting off the Emperor's supply lines. The Voren flagship was now in sight, and Ilara's ship was only a few hundred meters from it. Her hand hovered over the firing controls, but the tension in the air was suffocating. She knew what she had to do: destroy the flagship and eliminate the Emperor once and for all. But with every passing second, her mind screamed for peace. Could she end this war without further bloodshed? As her finger pressed down on the trigger, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Would this be the moment that shattered the Voren Empire's grip on the galaxy, or would it be the spark that ignited an even greater conflict? In the midst of the chaos, Bonner's thoughts kept drifting back to the faces of the soldiers who had fallen alongside him. They had all sacrificed so much, and Bonner wasn't about to let their deaths be in vain. The humans may have been the underdogs in this war, but they had something the Voren Empire didn't: determination. Just as the team reached the heart of the base, the doors to the superweapons control room slid open. Inside, the massive device hummed with energy, its core pulsing with destructive power. Bonner's heart skipped a beat as he realized they were only moments away from deactivating the weapon. But just as hope flickered, the ground shook beneath their feet. Suddenly, a Voren warlord and his soldiers emerged from the shadows. The warlord's armor was adorned with terrifying symbols of the Voren Empire, and his eyes burned with fury. Bonner's team immediately went into defensive positions, but they were vastly outnumbered. The warlord's soldiers advanced, their weapons drawn, and it seemed that escape was impossible. Bonner's mind raced as he weighed his options. They couldn't win this fight, not with their numbers so low, not with the superweapon still active. The weight of the mission, the pressure of knowing Earth's fate was hanging in the balance, made every decision feel like a matter of life or death. Just as the warlord raised his weapon to strike, a familiar voice crackled through Bonner's comm. "Hold your position, Bonner. We're coming in hot." It was Captain Ilara. The sound of her voice brought a rush of relief to Bonner's chest. He had no idea how she had managed to get reinforcements, but at that moment, he didn't care. Help was on the way. In the distance, the unmistakable shape of Ilara's flagship came into view, its weapons charging for the final assault. The human fleet, which had been engaging in a brutal space battle, had arrived at the perfect moment. The Voren warlord, seeing the incoming threat, hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Bonner and his team to make their move. The ground shook as orbital bombardments rained down from the human ships, striking the Voren forces with deadly precision. The Voren warlord roared in defiance, but it was clear that the battle had turned. Captain Ilara had arrived, and the final push had begun. The camera zoomed in on Bonner, his face set in determination as he fought through the chaos. His team was rallying around him, their courage renewed. The warlord and his soldiers faltered under the heavy bombardment, and with one final push, the Voren's superweapon was deactivated. But the battle was far from over. As the camera panned out, it was clear that humanity had just won a major victory, but the war was not yet finished. The Voren Empire would not give up so easily, and the humans knew that they had only just begun to fight for their survival. As Bonner and his team stood victorious, the looming question remained: could humanity withstand the full might of the Voren Empire, or would this victory be short-lived? The vastness of space was filled with the hum of warships and the flashing of weapons, the culmination of years of conflict. The final battle had begun. For the Voren Empire, it was the end of a long and brutal struggle to dominate the galaxy. For the humans and their newfound allies in the Draxel Confederation, this was their moment to prove they could stand against the overwhelming power of the Voren. Captain Ilara stood on the bridge of her flagship, staring out into the void. The battle ahead would be nothing like anything she had experienced before. The Voren Empire, now aware of the tenacity and unexpected resourcefulness of humanity, was pulling out all the stops. They had deployed their most powerful warships, each one a gargantuan, heavily armored behemoth with enough firepower to level entire planets. The Vorin had underestimated humanity before, but this time they were facing an adversary who would not back down. Ilara's mind raced as she gave the orders to her fleet. The humans were vastly outnumbered, and the odds seemed insurmountable. But they had something the Vorin didn't: innovation. With their robotic war machines, enhanced by AI-assisted combat tactics, the humans had the ability to strike with deadly precision. Ilara knew that these technologies would be their best chance to break through the Vorin's nearly impenetrable defenses. As the Vorin flagship loomed in the distance, the humans moved into formation, their ships weaving through the debris of past battles. Ilara's fingers danced across the controls, and the ships around her responded, coordinating their movements in a deadly dance. Drones, AI-guided and designed for maximum efficiency, launched in synchronized waves, targeting weak points in the Vorin warship's defenses. The sheer precision of the strike caught the Vorin off guard, and their line began to falter. The final assault was underway, and in the end, only one side would emerge victorious. The fate of the galaxy lay in the hands of a few brave humans who had dared to challenge the might of the Vorin Empire. The final battle had reached its climax. The once mighty Vorin flagship, the symbol of their imperial power, was now a smoldering heap of debris drifting in the cold expanse of space. A final, devastating explosion had torn through its hull, sending shockwaves that could be felt across the battlefield. It was the end of an era for the Vorin Empire. In the wake of that explosion, the remaining Vorin forces had no choice but to retreat. The humans, with their Draxil allies, had achieved what was once thought impossible. They had defeated an empire that had been dominating the galaxy for centuries. But the victory was bittersweet. The cost of the battle had been high. The human fleet had lost many ships, and countless lives were sacrificed in the name of this fleeting victory. On the surface, it seemed like the dawn of a new era. But beneath the cheers of triumph, there was a silent sorrow for all that had been lost. Captain Ilara stood at the helm of her flagship, the Sovereign, looking out at the wreckage of the once feared Vorin fleet. Her thoughts were distant, her gaze unwavering. She had led her people to victory, but the weight of that victory felt heavy on her shoulders. As the human ships regrouped and began their slow journey home, a sense of peace began to settle over the battlefield. The Vorin had been defeated, but the scars of war would remain. The galaxy had been irrevocably changed. New alliances had formed, old grudges had been settled, but the path forward was uncertain. Yet in the midst of all this chaos, there was hope, a hope that humanity had sparked in the hearts of those who had once seen them as nothing more than primitive, weak beings. Bonner, who had survived the intense fighting, now sat in his quarters, the quiet hum of the ship's engines the only sound around him. The victory was sweet, but the price of it had been steep. His thoughts wandered to his fallen comrades. He could still hear the echoes of their voices, the laughter and camaraderie they had shared in the days before the battle. Now, they were gone. The faces of those who had fallen were etched in his mind, their sacrifices not forgotten. But there was something else he couldn't shake: the bond he had formed with Raxor during the war. The Draxil general, once a proud and distant leader, had become a companion in arms, a trusted ally. When they first met, Bonner had viewed Raxor with suspicion, unsure of his true intentions. But over time, that distrust had evolved into something far stronger: mutual respect. Raxor had fought alongside the humans, leading his people into battle, and together they had overcome the Vorin's seemingly unstoppable might. The two men from vastly different worlds had become brothers in arms, each fighting for a future that was uncertain but full of potential. Raxor, too, had lost many of his soldiers in the conflict. As the battle ended, he had ordered his troops to honor the fallen, taking time to mourn and remember their sacrifices. He understood the pain Bonner felt, for he too had witnessed the devastation of war. The two of them, standing together on the battlefield, had shared a moment of quiet understanding. They had been through so much together, and now their alliance had proven to be a force that could reshape the galaxy. The visual spectacle of the victory was awe-inspiring. The camera panned out to show the human fleet and the Draxel ships soaring through the stars, side by side. The debris from the Vorin flagship floated in the void behind them, a silent testament to the victory that had been achieved. The vastness of space seemed to stretch on forever, but in that moment, the galaxy felt just a little bit smaller, as if the bonds between the humans and the Draxel were enough to change its very fabric. The stars twinkled in the distance, and the future seemed full of promise. Humanity, once seen as the underdogs in this galactic struggle, had proven their strength. Their victory had not come easily, but it was a victory forged in the fires of adversity. The unexpected alliance with the Draxel Confederation had proven to be the turning point in the war, and together they had shown that even the most powerful empires could be brought down by sheer willpower, ingenuity, and unity. As the human fleet made its way back to Earth, Captain Ilara took one final look at the battlefield. The war had ended, but the journey was far from over. The galaxy had been forever changed by the humans' unexpected rise to power. The old ways of thinking, the belief that humans were weak and insignificant, had been shattered. Now, the galaxy would have to reckon with the new reality. Humanity was here to stay, and they would not be silenced. But even in victory, the lessons of war remained. Sacrifice was inevitable, and the price of peace was often high. The people who fought and died in this conflict would never be forgotten, their names etched into the history of the galaxy. And for Bonner, the victory was bittersweet. He would carry the memories of his fallen comrades with him always, knowing that their sacrifice had made this moment possible. The final moments of the story brought a clear message. Good versus evil was not always a simple battle of light against dark. It was about the choices made, the sacrifices taken, and the strength of those who refused to give up, even when the odds were against them. Humanity's victory, against all odds, symbolized more than just the defeat of the Vorin Empire. It represented the power of the human spirit, an undeniable force that could not be crushed by any foe. As the human fleet, along with the Draxel, sailed toward the unknown future, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had proven that they could stand against the galaxy's greatest threats, and they would continue to do so, no matter what the future held. This victory was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Underestimating humanity was a grave mistake, and now the future was in their hands.